Today, we are going to introduce ourselves to another economic indicators, which is inflation. We are going to talk about what inflation is. We're going to learn how inflation affects us as individuals and also the macroeconomy. We are going to learn how to measure inflation. And last but not least, we are going to learn to apply inflation and price indexes in our daily life. What is inflation? Inflation is an increase in the average level of prices of goods and services. Sometimes in our course, we will also use the word the general price level instead of the average price level. Sometimes, because we are in a macroeconomics class, we simply say the price level. Deflation is the opposite. Deflation is a decline in the average level of prices of goods and services. From this definition, I'm sure many of you find that we live in a world where we observe inflation much more than deflation. Deflation is very rare. How often does your landlord lower the rent? Almost never. And I'm sure your landlord would justify the raise in rent by citing inflation, which is partially true. Inflation is part of the reason why we constantly have an increase in rent. When we talk about inflation, we want to make sure that we are looking at the average price level. The reason I want to bring this up is because we as human beings, we tend to pay too much attention. We tend to place too much weight on things and people that are close to us. Take for example, I love going to restaurants. I do grocery shoppings. So if you ask me about inflation, I would say that there is no way the inflation rate is so low in the United States. The government must be lying. Because when you look at the groceries, compared to a few years ago, okay, and you look at the restaurants, okay, so compared to a few years ago, when you look at the menu prices, okay, so it used to be that Applebee's you can easily get some entree for less than $10, but no more, right? So if you ask me, I would say inflation is high. But if you ask some other people, for example, those people who are into high-tech gadgets or high-tech toys, okay, so take for example, or electronic appliances, for example, TV, LED TV, computers, okay, laptops, okay, and so on and so forth. Okay, so they are likely to say that, well, there is no inflation. I mean, the inflation is very, very mild. Because, I mean, when you look at the price of, let's say, LED TV, 50-inch LED TV, right? I mean, nobody brags about that anymore, right? It used to be a big deal. But these days, I mean, the prices have dropped a lot, right? So, and what do they have these days? They have like 4K TV now, okay? So, and then also when you look at laptop, desktop, okay? If you still use desktop. A few years ago, it was a thousand. I mean, if you want to get a decent desktop, we're not looking at, those powerful gaming computers. Just regular decent desktop or laptop. Okay? A A few years ago, you probably have to spend about $1,000, but these days, $500 or $600 will get you a decent one. So if you ask these people about inflation, they are likely to tell you that, well, there is no inflation. But neither of us are right because we are biased. Okay, what we are looking at is actually not the average prices. What we're looking at is the relative price. The relative price is the price of one good in comparison with the price of other goods. Okay? Why don't we look at a hypothetical economy? So this is a hypothetical economy. To simplify things, we're looking at only two types of goods. So people in this country, in this economy, only consume two types of goods. They spend on two types of goods. And we assume that the income of this economy is equally distributed between these two types of goods. So that means they carry equal weight. Neither is more important than the other. So here is the scenario. So if the price of oranges increases by 10% and the price of apples decreases by 10%, so let's look at the first question. What happens to the relative price of oranges? So this one should be easy, right? Okay. It increases. We have only two types of goods. So when you look at the relative price of oranges, obviously we compare that to the price of apples. So relative to the price of apples, the relative price of oranges increases. But then when you look at the price level, so once again, in macroeconomics, a lot of times when we talk about the price level, we actually mean the average prices or the general price level of goods and services. So when you look at the price level, because we assume that these two goods are equal weighted, so that means the increase in the price of oranges is exactly offset by the drop in the price of apples. So there is no change in the price level. In other words, zero inflation rate. So policymakers would say that, well, there is no change in the price level. But obviously, I mean, people who love oranges, they are not happy because now they have to pay more. And then people who love apples, they are happy now. But for policymakers, there is no change in the price level. Okay, so that's the difference between relative price and average price. And when it comes to inflation, we are concerned about the average price, not the relative price. Inflation, unlike unemployment, well, with unemployment, there is no doubt. Very few people will argue against the notion that unemployment is bad. Inflation, unlike unemployment, is not so straightforward. Inflation, under normal circumstances means it is mild, usually in the low single digit, and predictable. So easy to make prediction about what will happen to the inflation in the near future. So if it is mild and predictable, inflation is simply a redistributive mechanism of wealth and income. It is neither good nor bad. So when it is mild and predictable, some people get hurt, some people benefit. As a general rule of thumb, those whose income increases faster than the general price level, tend to benefit from an inflation. Fixed income earners tend to get hurt from an inflation. Borrowers tend to benefit while lenders tend to get hurt by an inflation. Okay, so these are general rules of thumb. So let's take a look at a few simple examples to see how inflation can serve as a redistributive mechanism of income and wealth. So here's a case. We simplify things by assuming that there are only two types of goods that are consumed in this economy: house and food. Okay, house that we live in and food. So this is a representative. We're looking at a representative individual. Representative individual means that this individuals resembles a majority of the individuals in this economy. Okay? So this person, this individual, has a nominal income of $800 per month. Okay? So in year one, he earns $800 a month, and he rents a house for $500, and each servings of food costs $1. So that means he gets to enjoy 300 servings of food. He spent $300 on food, so he gets to enjoy 300 servings of food. So in year two, this same person, this individual, still earns $800 a month, okay? But the rent has gone up. It has gone up by 20%, from $500 to $600. The price of food stays the same at $1 per serving. Okay? So now here's the question. Is there an inflation in this economy? So let's take a minute. Is there an inflation in this economy? The answer is yes. We're looking at two types of goods here. Okay. House, for the first type of goods, the rent goes up by 20%. The second type of good, food, the price of food stays the same. So one goes up, the other one stays the same. So on average, the price level goes up. So we do have an inflation in this type of economy. And when you look at this person, this individual, because he now has to spend more on rent, he gets to spend less on food. So although the price of food is still $1 each, he gets to eat less now. 200 servings of food. Can you think of anybody who can benefit from this kind of inflation? I'm sure many of you can think of landlord, right? So in this particular case, landlord benefits from this type of inflation, what tenants are hurt. Okay? Another examples. So here's a person. So we further simplify things by assuming that there is only one type of good, house, that we live in. Okay? So this person is a fixed income earner. Fixed income earners are those people whose income rarely change or change very little, like, CUNY faculty members. Okay, so, well, I'm sure you have heard from radio. I mean, the last couple of years, the CUNY faculty members were lobbying for a raise because we haven't gotten a raise since 2009. I think we finally got one last year, but still very little. But anyway, we are typical fixed income earners. So when you look at this fixed income earner, the nominal income is $1,000 per month every year. Okay, so that's fixed income earners. And in year one, a house, the rent is $500. And then in year two, you can see that the rent has doubled. Okay, so obviously there is inflation. The inflation rate here is 100%. Okay, so let's look at how this will affect this fixed income earner. Well, basically, we're looking at the purchasing power of this person. So in year one, okay, so year one, so this person makes $1,000. So has to pay $500 for rent. So that means this person gets to rent 2 houses. Okay, so that's the purchasing power. And then in year two, when you look at the purchasing power in terms of the number of houses he can rent, that's $1,000 over $1,000. So that's 1. So now he gets to rent only 1 house. His purchasing power has been halved, okay, because the inflation has gone up by 100%, okay, has doubled. So obviously he is worse off because now he has to live with his mother. Okay? So that's how fixed income earners tend to get hurt by an inflation. So now let's turn to the last examples. Lenders and borrowers. Borrowers tend to benefit from an inflation, whereas lenders tend to get hurt by an inflation. So here's a simplified scenario. We have a loan, $1,000, okay, that is made in year one. So lenders lend $1,000 to borrowers in year one. Borrowers repay the loan in year two. We assume that there's only one type of good in this economy, food. So that means the price of food is simply the price level of this economy. When you look at the price of food in year one, that's $1. When you look at the price of food in year two, that's $2. So that means we do have inflation. In fact, the price level has doubled. So we have 100% inflation rate here. So let's look at how that will affect borrowers and lenders. So in year one, so let's look at borrowers. So in year one, borrowers get to spend this $1,000. Okay, get to enjoy food in year one. So $1,000. Okay. And then that's $1 per serving. So that means borrowers get to enjoy 1,000 servings of food. And now let's look at lenders. Okay. So that's year two, right? Because lenders only get to spend this $1,000 in year two. So now $1,000. Now each serving of food costs $2. So we get 500 servings of food. Okay, so that's how lenders tend to get hurt by an inflation. Okay? Because lenders tend to get to spend the money when it is worth less. But some of you may notice that there is a problem with this scenario. Many of you will say that there is no way lenders are going to just get back the principal, because when we make a loan, we get the principal plus the interest, right? So now, okay, so let's add interest into the scenario. If you were a lender, given all this information, what kind of interest rate would you charge your borrowers? So what kind of interest rate would you charge your borrowers? Just think about it. Okay. Well, we know that the price has gone up by 100%. The price level has doubled. Okay. Some of you would say that, well, I would want to charge higher interest rate to protect myself from that, to protect my purchasing power. Okay? Because, I mean, if this is the case, then I definitely would not want to lend my money, because I would rather just, I would rather just keep that $1,000 in year one and then enjoy, more food. Okay? Because the whole reason that we lend money to other people or we make financial investment is we hope to grow money on money. So that, if we lend the money out this year, next year we get to have a little bit more purchasing power. We get to eat more. Okay? But now with this case, obviously, we will be better off just keeping this $1,000 for ourselves. So we get to eat, at least we get to eat more in year one. So how much, what is the interest rate that you are going to charge? Well, some of you may say, 50%. Let's try interest rate at 50%. So that's a very high interest rate, right? So some of you would say that, well, that sounds good, right? But let's look at what happened. So in year two, let's look at the purchasing power of lenders. Okay? If they charge 50%. Okay? So let's charge 50%, 1,050. So $1,000, 50%. So that means that's 1,500, right? 1,500 in year two, and then divided by 2, so that will give us 750 servings. Still fall short of $1,000. Okay, so some of you now may think that, well, maybe we can try 100%, right? So let's look at the purchasing power for lenders. If you charge an interest rate of 100%, so that would give us 2,000. Okay, so that would be 1,000 servings of food. So that means lenders will require at least 100% before they are willing to make this kind of loan. So you're saying that, well, so you may say that, well, now it's fine, right? Okay, so we can be lenders. We can lend money out as long as we charge at least 100% interest rate. Well, here's the problem. In real life, in this case, we are given all the information in year one. So we know that inflation is going to be 100% in year two. But that's not the case in real life. In real life, we don't know what will happen to the price level next year. Okay, so we can only make some guesses. We can only make some predictions. And it is very hard to make that kind of predictions. But let's just assume that you do make good predictions. You are very smart. You have a crystal ball. So you know what will happen to the inflation in year two. So you know that it is going to be 100%. So you charge your customers 110%. So that's more than enough to compensate for the inflation risk. So the problem here is other people may not agree with you because you are the smartest person in the world. You have the crystal ball. But other people, they don't think the inflation is going to be that high. So other lenders may be willing to lend their money at, a much lower interest rate, 50%, for example. So nobody is going to borrow money from you. So at one point, you may start to second guess yourself. You may think that, well, maybe I am wrong. So at one point, you may yield, you may give in, you may start, charging the interest rate that everybody else does, and you get hurt. Okay, so that's how lenders tend to get hurt. Okay, by an inflation. But in the United States, for almost 2 decades now, the inflation rate has been mild, low single digit, and in fact, very low single digit, and more importantly, it has been predictable. So we really haven't had this kind of problems for lenders to a very large extent. But that's not the case where we have countries that have hyperinflation. Okay? So hyperinflation means very high inflation. Okay? Usually we're talking about double-digit inflation rate, okay? and even triple-digit inflation rate. Depending on the country, so if you're looking at a country like the United States, even a high single digit can be considered a hyperinflation. So hyperinflation is a different story, because previously when we say that if it is under normal circumstances, when inflation rate is mild and predictable, it is not a problem. It is simply a redistributive mechanism. It's not a problem for the economy. However, when we have hyperinflation, that will become a problem. Okay? To make it worse, when we have high inflation, it tends to have a life on its own. It gets out of control very easily. Okay? So when we have high inflation, to make it worse, it's usually unpredictable too. So those two things together is likely to cause very damaging consequences for a macro economy. They are likely to create a lot of uncertainty, and this uncertainty is likely to distort a lot of decisions, including investment, consumption, productions, and saving. And so take, for example, consumption. I mean, if there's a hyperinflation, most likely workers are going to demand to be paid every day. Okay? I mean, who wants to be paid at the end of the month, because you don't know whether that money will buy you anything at all. So everybody demands to be paid at the end of the day. So once workers get paid, the first thing they are going to do is they are going to rush to stores to grab as many things as possible with the money they have, because they are not going to save. I mean, who wants to save the money? Because tomorrow it may not buy you anything. So at least, today you get to, enjoy or stock up flour, food, clothing, and so on and so forth. Okay? So there's a distortion in consumption and saving, because nobody wants to save. So obviously, there is no money to channel through financial markets and financial institutions to firms. So firms don't get the financial investment to continue to produce goods and services, or to continue to spend on investment. So let's recall investment. When we talk about GDP, investment in macroeconomics means spending on capital goods and services. So because prices are highly unpredictable, so companies, they are unlikely to want to invest as much, because they don't know how to price their goods and services. So I mean, if the price too high, they are afraid that they will turn away their customers. But if the price too low, they are afraid that they're gonna take some losses because the cost may be going up very quickly. So because of that, they may not want to be aggressive. So they may underproduce. That could be a distortion in production. And also they want to be conservative, so they are unlikely to want to expand their factories or facilities. So not a lot of investment under those circumstances. Before we turn to another section, why don't we watch a very short video clip?